Hampshire, summer of 1817. The thunder arrived first, rolling across the darkened countryside like cannon fire from some distant, unseen battlefield, shaking the very foundations of Chelmsford Manor until the crystal chandeliers trembled and sang their glassy warnings. In the servants' corridor on the third floor, Miss Theodora Fairmont pressed herself against the cold stone wall, her heart hammering so violently she feared it might betray her presence to the two figures conversing in the study below. She had not meant to overhear. She had simply been retrieving Lady Sophronia's forgotten embroidery from the morning room when she heard her employer's voice, low and venomous, drifting up from the partially open study door below. What she heard in those terrible minutes would change everything. Lady Sophronia's cold instructions to the family solicitor about forging her late husband's will, her casual dismissal of her young nephew's rightful inheritance, her threat to ensure the boy would not live to see his 21st birthday should he prove troublesome. Thea's hands trembled as she clutched the embroidery hoop, the delicate stitches of roses now seeming obscene in their innocent beauty. She had no family, no protector, no recourse. If Lady Sophronia discovered her eavesdropping, Thea would be accused of theft or worse, sent to prison, or simply made to disappear as the nephew was meant to. The realization crashed over her like the storm now breaking against the manor's windows. She had to run, and she had to run tonight. If stories of courage born from desperation, of love found in the most unexpected moments, and of two souls forced together by fate touch your heart, subscribe now and stay with us. You won't want to miss what happens next. The decision, once made, left no room for hesitation. Thea waited until the household settled into uneasy sleep, the storm masking any sound her movements might make. She wrapped herself in her threadbare cloak, stuffed her few coins into her pocket, and slipped down the servants' staircase with the practiced silence of 3 years spent trying not to be noticed. The stables smelled of hay and horse warmth, and she felt a pang of guilt as she saddled the gentlest mare, a dappled gray named Misty, who had always nuzzled her hand during her rare visits. She whispered against the horse's soft nose, asking forgiveness and explaining that she had no choice but to take the animal. Her voice trembled with the weight of what she was about to do. The storm had intensified by the time Thea urged Misty through the gates and onto the muddy road heading west. Rain lashed her face, cold and merciless, soaking through her cloak within minutes. Lightning illuminated the landscape in brief, terrible flashes. Bare trees like skeletal hands reaching toward the roiling sky, hedgerows bent nearly horizontal by the wind. She had no destination, only the desperate need to put distance between herself and Chelmsford Manor before Lady Sophronia discovered her absence at dawn. 10 miles away, on that same treacherous road, Julian Sinclair, Duke of Greymont, was discovering that inheriting a dukedom came with complications he had never anticipated during his decade in India. His carriage lurched through another pothole, and he braced himself against the worn leather seat, grateful at least that he had dismissed his valet in London. The fewer witnesses to his undignified flight from his own family, the better. His driver called through the small opening, voicing concern that the horses were struggling and visibility was nearly gone. He suggested they should stop at the next inn. Julian replied firmly that there would be no inns. His dear cousins would check every posting house between London and Cornwall. They must keep going. He had thought returning to England would be straightforward. Accept the title, settle the estate's affairs, then return to the trading company he had built in Calcutta. Instead, he had walked into a nest of grasping relatives who saw only his fortune and his unmarried state. Lady Amelia, his third cousin once removed, had been particularly persistent, her mother more so. The final straw had come that morning when he discovered they had already announced an engagement without his consent. So he had done what he did best. He ran. Not from cowardice, but from the suffocating weight of expectations he had no intention of meeting. Cornwall was his now, or would be once he reached Greymont Castle. Perhaps there, amid ruins and sea cliffs, he could find peace. The thunder that followed the next lightning strike seemed to split the very sky. Julian heard his horses scream, felt the carriage lurch violently to the left. Then he saw her, a flash of sodden cloak and red hair, a horse rearing, a small figure tumbling into the mud directly in their path. He shouted for the driver to stop, already reaching for the door handle. The carriage halted so abruptly, he was thrown forward. Julian flung open the door and leaped down into the storm, his boots immediately sinking into the mire. The woman lay crumpled in the road, her horse galloping away in panic. He ran to her, falling to his knees in the mud. He asked if she was injured, touching her shoulder gently, and she erupted into motion. Steel flashed in the lightning. A small knife aimed directly at his throat. Julian jerked back, his reflexes honed by years in foreign ports serving him well. The blade whistled past his jaw, missing by inches. She gasped, ordering him to stay back as she tried to scramble to her feet, immediately crying out in pain as her ankle gave way. She declared she would not go back, that she would die first. Julian kept his voice calm despite his racing heart, assuring her he meant no harm. He had nearly run her down. He wanted only to help. Her laugh was wild, rain streaming down her face. She asked what help could possibly come from men like him. He was one of her creatures, was he not? She had been sent to bring Thea back. Julian held up his empty hands, explaining that he did not know who this mysterious woman was, and he certainly had not been sent to find anyone. He was simply trying to reach Cornwall before his own pursuers caught up with him. Something in his tone, perhaps the bitterness in that last phrase, made her pause. Her knife hand wavered. Lightning illuminated her face, and Julian found himself staring into the greenest eyes he had ever seen, bright with pain and defiance and a desperate kind of courage. She observed that he was running too, and it was not a question. Julian confirmed this with weary humor, noting that these damned roads were not cooperating with his escape. Now would she please let him look at that ankle before they both drowned? A massive crack of thunder punctuated his words, and somewhere behind them, a tree split and fell with an earth-shaking crash, blocking the road entirely. The driver called out that they could not go forward or back. There was a cottage ahead, just off the road. They must take shelter. Julian looked at the woman, at her white face and trembling hands, at the way she cradled her ankle. He asked if she could stand. She began to say she could, then tried and bit back a cry of agony. No, she admitted, she could not. Julian begged her forgiveness for what he was about to do. Before she could protest, he scooped her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, all defiant spirit in a frame too slender. She stiffened, but did not fight him, perhaps recognizing the futility, or perhaps simply too exhausted. She mentioned the knife faintly, as if unsure what to do with it. He told her to keep it if it made her feel safer. But he promised on whatever honor he had left that he would not harm her. The cottage was indeed just ahead, barely visible through the sheets of rain. It was small, abandoned by the look of it, but it had a roof and walls, and most importantly, it was not the road. Julian's driver helped him force the door open, then immediately announced he would stay with the horses in what remained of an old stable. The animals were terrified, he explained, and if he left them, they would bolt. He would be close if His Grace needed him. Then Julian was alone in the dark cottage with a woman who did not trust him, his arms full of trembling defiance, and no clear idea how to proceed. He set her gently on the floor near what he hoped was a fireplace, then fumbled in his pockets for flint and steel. He asked her name as he focused on the practical task of coaxing damp kindling to light. A long pause. Then quietly, she replied it was Thea. He asked if it was just Thea, nothing more. She confirmed it was just Thea, at least until she knew he would not betray her to Lady Sophronia Chelmsford. Julian's hands stilled. He knew that name, the widow Chelmsford, known throughout Hampshire as a woman of impeccable reputation and charitable works. He expressed his understanding that she was a woman of virtue. Thea's voice was flat as she corrected him. Lady Sophronia was a monster. And if he took Thea back to her, the woman would kill her as surely as she planned to kill her nephew. The fire caught, weak but growing, casting flickering shadows across the cottage walls. Julian turned to look at her properly for the first time. She was perhaps 22, with auburn hair darkening to copper where the rain had plastered it to her face. Freckles dusted her nose and cheeks, and those extraordinary green eyes watched him with the wariness of a trapped animal. Her dress was plain, the cloak good quality, but years old. A servant, perhaps, or a companion. He told her simply to explain everything, settling himself a respectful distance away. In return, he would tell her why he was fleeing from his own inheritance. So she did. As the storm raged outside and Julian tended to her swelling ankle with strips torn from his cravat, Thea spoke of 3 years as Lady Sophronia's companion, of the small cruelties and larger ones, of the overheard conversation that revealed murder in the planning. Her voice shook but did not break. When she finished, Julian was silent for a long moment. He asked if she had no family, no one to protect her. She told him she had parents once. They died of fever when she was 19. She had some education, enough to become a companion, not enough to be a governess. She had been alone since then. Julian said she was not alone, not anymore. When they reached Cornwall, he would help her. There must be someone they could tell, some authority who would listen. Thea interrupted, her voice heavy with reality. She was a servant with no proof. Lady Sophronia was a wealthy widow with an spotless reputation. Who would believe her? She was right, and they both knew it. Julian found himself admiring her clear-eyed assessment of her situation, even as his heart ached for the injustice of it. Then they would find another way, he declared. But first, they must survive this night. They did more than survive. As the hours crawled toward dawn and the storm showed no signs of abating, they talked. Julian told her of India, of spice markets and monsoons, of the trading empire he had built with his own hands and wit. Thea spoke of books she had read in stolen moments, of dreams abandoned, of the strange freedom that came with having nothing left to lose. At one point, she asked why he had left England in the first place. Julian explained that he had not fit here. The rules, the expectations, the endless pretense. In Calcutta, a man could be judged by what he did, not who his grandfather was. She observed that yet he had come back. He agreed ruefully that yes, he had come back. To an estate he never wanted and a title he never expected. His cousin had been the heir. When he died without children, the title passed to his uncle, then to Julian. 3 deaths, and suddenly he was a duke. Thea asked if he regretted it. Julian considered. He regretted that duty called him back. But if it had not, he would not be here now, and she would be alone in this storm. Thea looked at him then, really looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. She said quietly that he was not at all what she had expected a duke to be. He asked what she had expected. She told him someone old or cruel or both, someone who would see her as beneath notice. He was different, she finished quietly, color rising in her cheeks despite the cold. The fire had burned low, and Julian added the last of the broken furniture he had found in the corner. They would need to preserve body heat if they were to make it through the night without taking ill. He stripped off his sodden coat and waistcoat, wringing them out and draping them near the fire. Thea did the same with her cloak, though she kept her back to him, a modesty he appreciated even as he recognized its futility. They were already hopelessly compromised by circumstance. Julian suggested they should rest. Dawn could not be far off. Thea asked what would happen then. He explained they would continue to Cornwall. She would come with him to Greymont. Whatever came after, at least she would be safe from Lady Sophronia. She asked if he would truly do that. Take in a stranger, a fugitive. Julian insisted she was not a fugitive. She was someone who witnessed a crime and had the courage to run rather than stay silent. There was no shame in that. Thea nodded, though her eyes remained troubled. They settled on opposite sides of the small room, but as the temperature dropped and the fire dwindled, Julian noticed her shivering violently. He moved closer, offering the single threadbare blanket he had found. They should share it, he suggested matter-of-factly. For warmth. He promised he was a gentleman. She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. They arranged themselves carefully, backs to the wall, the blanket draped over both of them. Proper distance was maintained, at least at first. But exhaustion and cold are powerful forces, and sometime in the darkest hours before dawn, Thea's head drooped against Julian's shoulder, and his arm came around her to share his warmth. When they woke, it was to the sound of horses and voices, to daylight streaming through the cottage's broken windows, and to the horrified face of Lord Pemberton, the local magistrate, staring at them from the doorway. The magistrate breathed in shock, asking if that was the Duke of Greymont. And who was? His eyes widened as he recognized Thea, Miss Fairmont, Lady Sophronia's companion. Julian felt Thea stiffen against him. He stood quickly, putting himself between her and the magistrate, beginning to explain. Lord Pemberton interrupted, his face transforming from shock to stern disapproval. Could His Grace explain? Because from where Pemberton stood, it appeared the Duke had spent the night alone with an unmarried woman of no family or protection. Did His Grace comprehend what this meant? Julian began to mention the storm as explanation. The magistrate declared he cared not about the weather. He cared about propriety and the law. Miss Fairmont's reputation was utterly destroyed. Every person in this county would know by nightfall that she was found in a cottage with him, their clothes drying by the fire, the two of them sleeping in each other's arms. There was only one possible remedy for such a scandal. Thea had struggled to her feet, wincing at the pain in her ankle. She assured Lord Pemberton that nothing improper had occurred. His Grace had been a perfect gentleman. Pemberton said coldly that her assurances changed nothing. Whether anything had occurred was irrelevant. They had been seen. That was enough. He turned to Julian, noting that as a man of honor, His Grace knew what must be done. Julian's mind raced. He looked at Thea, at her proud bearing despite the circumstances, at the fear she was trying so hard to hide. He thought of Lady Sophronia and whatever threat she posed. He thought of his own family, already hunting him. And he thought of the strange, unexpected connection he had felt with this woman over the course of one night. He heard himself declare that he would marry her if she would have him. Thea's eyes snapped to his face. She began to protest that he did not have to do this. Julian said quietly that actually, he did. And not because of what Lord Pemberton believed happened, but because if he did not marry her, she would be utterly ruined. No one would employ her. She would be vulnerable to Lady Sophronia or anyone else who wished to exploit her. At least as his Duchess, she would have protection. Thea said, her voice low and fierce, that she did not need charity. Julian paused, searching for the right word. It was not charity, he said finally. It was practical. She repeated the word practical, and he could not tell if the note in her voice was relief or disappointment. Lord Pemberton cleared his throat, announcing he would arrange for a special license. Given the circumstances and His Grace's position, it could be accomplished quickly. 3 days hence, perhaps. 3 days. Julian looked at Thea, who stood rigid and pale, her eyes unreadable. He wanted to say something to ease the shock, to make this forced marriage seem less like a trap. But with Pemberton and his companions watching, all he could do was nod in agreement. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of arrangements and awkward silences. Julian installed Thea at a respectable inn in the nearby village, with his driver's wife as chaperone. He procured the special license, arranged for a simple ceremony, and tried not to think about how badly he had complicated both their lives. On the morning of the wedding, he stood in the small country church and watched Thea walk toward him in a borrowed dress of pale blue silk. Her hair had been tamed into an elegant arrangement, and someone had lent her pearls. She looked beautiful and terrified, and utterly unwilling to meet his eyes. The vicar spoke the ancient words. Julian made his responses automatically, his mind elsewhere. This was not how he had imagined marriage, if he had imagined it at all. Thea's voice, when she spoke her vows, was barely audible. The vicar pronounced them man and wife. Julian lifted the veil and kissed her cheek, a chaste brush of lips that felt wrong, given the intimacy they had already shared in that cottage. She flinched slightly, and his heart sank. The small gathering of witnesses congratulated them with varying degrees of sincerity. Julian saw speculation in every eye, heard whispers as soon as backs were turned. Already the story was spreading. The mysterious Duke and the poor companion, caught in a compromising position. Some versions painted him as a seducer, others as an honorable man doing his duty. None, he thought bitterly, came close to the truth. They departed for Cornwall that afternoon, Thea sitting as far from him as the carriage would allow, staring resolutely out the window. Julian let her have her silence, understanding that she needed time to process everything that had happened. But as the miles rolled past and they drew closer to Greymont Castle, he felt compelled to speak. He said her name gently, then told her he knew this was not what either of them wanted. But he meant what he said. She would be safe now. Whatever else happened, he would protect her. She turned to look at him finally, her green eyes luminous with unshed tears. She asked simply why. He asked what she meant. She elaborated. Why be kind to her? He could have left her on that road. He could have refused to marry her and let her face the consequences. Why help someone he did not even know? Julian considered his answer carefully. Because the alternative was unconscionable, he said. Because he had been in foreign lands where he had no protection, no name, no safety net. He remembered what that felt like, and because he hesitated. Because that night in the cottage, he had felt less alone than he had in 10 years. A tear slipped down her cheek. She confessed she had felt it too, which made this worse somehow. Julian asked why worse. She explained that it had not been real. It was just two frightened people talking through a storm. And now they were trapped in a marriage neither of them chose, and he would come to resent her, and she would hate herself for being the burden he never wanted to carry. Julian said firmly that she was not a burden. She was his wife. That may have come about through unfortunate circumstances, but it was still a fact, and he would very much like them to at least try to make the best of it. Thea looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. She would try, she said. But she would not pretend to be something she was not. She did not know how to be a duchess. Julian admitted that neither did he, apparently. They would learn together. Greymont Castle rose from the Cornish cliffs like something from a Gothic novel, all grey stone and windswept battlements. The sea crashed against the rocks below, filling the air with salt spray and the cries of gulls. The scent of brine and damp stone hung heavy in the air, ancient and melancholy, while the wind whistled constantly through invisible cracks in the medieval walls, creating a low, mournful keening that never quite ceased. The very stones seemed to hold centuries of stories within them, weathered by countless storms and witness to generations of joy and sorrow. Thea stood in the courtyard, staring up at her new home with something between wonder and dismay, feeling the weight of all that history settling onto her shoulders. Julian followed her gaze, acknowledging it was rather overwhelming. He had inherited it sight unseen. From the reports, it needed extensive repairs. Mrs. Blackwell, the housekeeper, emerged to greet them. She was a stern-looking woman in her 50s, her gray hair pulled back severely, but her eyes were kind as they took in Thea's nervous face. She greeted both Graces formally, then turned to Thea to welcome her to Greymont. They had prepared the Duchess's chambers, she informed her new mistress. Thea repeated the words faintly. The Duchess's chambers. Separate from, she began to ask. Mrs. Blackwell confirmed that the Duke's chambers were in the East Wing. It was traditional. Julian saw the relief flash across Thea's face and felt a pang of something he did not want to examine too closely. He suggested that perhaps Mrs. Blackwell could show the Duchess to her rooms. He was sure she was exhausted from the journey. As Thea followed the housekeeper inside, Julian remained in the courtyard, listening to the sea and wondering what he had gotten himself into. He had rescued her, yes, but at what cost? A marriage of convenience to a woman who saw him as her unwanted savior. A wife who flinched when he touched her. A future that stretched ahead, full of polite distance and carefully maintained boundaries. He had fled England to escape feeling trapped. Instead, he had trapped them both. The first week passed in careful avoidance. Greymont was large enough that Julian and Thea could go hours without encountering each other. They met for dinner, a stilted affair where they discussed the weather and the condition of the estate, and absolutely nothing of consequence. Julian buried himself in learning about his properties and responsibilities. Thea explored the castle, her injured ankle healing slowly, finding refuge in the extensive library. Her first attempt at managing the household was a small disaster. She requested rather than instructed when asking the footman to move furniture in the drawing room, which caused confusion among the servants who stood uncertain, looking to one another for guidance. It was Mrs. Blackwell who, later that afternoon, found Thea in the library and explained with gentle patience that authority was not a question of rudeness, but of clarity. The staff, the housekeeper told her, craved firm but fair leadership. They wanted to serve their Duchess well, but they needed to understand her expectations without ambiguity. A Duchess who asked permission of her own servants created disorder, not kindness. Thea had listened, mortified at her error, but grateful for the instruction. She practiced with Mrs. Blackwell that very day, learning to modulate her tone, to give clear instructions, to inspect work without apologizing for doing so. It was exhausting and unnatural, but she was determined to learn. It was in the library that Julian found her one afternoon some days later, curled in a window seat with a book of poetry. She looked up as he entered, and he saw her instinctive move to flee, then her visible effort to remain still. He apologized for disturbing her, explaining he was looking for the estate ledgers. She began to say she would leave. Julian interrupted gently, asking her to please stay. He moved to the desk where the ledgers were kept, reminding her that this was her home now. She should not have to leave every room he entered. Thea set down her book carefully. She asked if it was truly her home. He expressed surprise at the question. Of course it was. She told him it did not feel like it. It felt like she was a guest who overstayed her welcome. Or worse, an obligation he was too polite to shirk. Julian abandoned the pretense of looking for ledgers and came to sit in the chair across from her window seat. He asked if that was truly how she saw herself. She asked how else should she see herself. She was a charity case he married out of duty. The servants whispered about it. Everyone knew the Duke was trapped into marriage by a scheming companion. Julian demanded to know who said such things, anger flaring in his voice. Thea replied that no one said it to her face, but she heard them. She saw how they looked at her, and she could not blame them because it was true, was it not? He had been trapped. Julian corrected her. They had both been trapped. By circumstance, by scandal, by a magistrate with more concern for propriety than common sense. But he wanted her to understand something, he continued, leaning forward. That night in the cottage had been the first time in years he felt like himself. Not a duke, not an heir, not an obligation to anyone. Just a man talking to a woman who understood what it meant to be alone. Thea's eyes had filled with tears again. Then why, she asked, did it feel like they were more alone now than they were then? Julian replied simply that it was because they were scared. He was scared of failing her, of not being what she needed. She was scared of being a burden, of being trapped. So they kept their distance and pretended politeness was enough. She asked if it was enough. He admitted it was not. They sat in silence for a moment, the sound of the sea drifting through the open window. Finally, Thea spoke, confessing she did not know how to do this. How to be his wife when they barely knew each other. How to run a household this size when she had been nothing but a companion. How to face society when everyone believed the worst of her. Julian echoed his earlier words. They would learn together, one day at a time. No pretense, no performance. Just two people trying to make a life from an impossible situation. Thea wiped at her eyes, observing that he made it sound simple. He acknowledged it was not simple at all. But perhaps it did not have to be as complicated as they were making it either. She managed a small smile, the first he had seen since their wedding day. Perhaps not, she agreed. It was a beginning, tentative and uncertain, but a beginning nonetheless. Over the next weeks, Julian and Thea fell into a new rhythm. They began taking breakfast together, then walks around the grounds when Thea's ankle permitted. Julian showed her the estate's accounts and was surprised to discover she had a quick head for figures. As he examined the ledgers with their antiquated notations and inefficient methods, Julian could not help but compare the estate's management to the ruthlessly logical system of a spice warehouse in Calcutta. The English aristocracy, he reflected with some irony, valued tradition above all else, even when tradition was synonymous with loss. Perhaps that was one gift his years abroad had given him, the ability to see past what had always been done to what actually worked. Thea, in turn, began working with Mrs. Blackwell to address the castle's most pressing needs. One evening over dinner, she reported that the East Wing was practically falling down, and the tenant cottages needed repairs before winter. Mrs. Blackwell had shown her the budget. They could afford it if they were careful. Julian looked at her animated face, so different from the pale, frightened woman he had married. He remarked that she had been busy. She explained she needed something to do, something to feel useful. She hoped he did not mind that she had looked at the accounts. Mind? Julian was grateful. This was her home. She should have a hand in managing it. Thea corrected softly. Their home. Julian felt something warm unfurl in his chest at her words. But their fragile peace was shattered 2 weeks later when a carriage bearing the crest of the Earl of Thornbury arrived unannounced. From it emerged Lady Amelia and her mother, the Countess of Thornbury, along with a retinue of servants and enough luggage for an extended stay. Julian was in the stables when they arrived. By the time he reached the entrance hall, he found Thea facing down the Countess with admirable composure despite being clearly outmatched. Thea was explaining that they were not expected, and if they had sent word ahead, the Countess interrupted with disdain, dripping from every word. Sent word? To what end? Give them time to refuse? They were family. They did not need permission to visit. Julian spoke coldly from the doorway, correcting that they were very distant family. And in fact, they did need permission. This was his home, and they were not invited. Lady Amelia turned, her beautiful face arranged in lines of hurt confusion. She asked how Julian could possibly mean to turn them away, after everything. After everything? A vein pulsed at Julian's temple, and his voice, when he responded, was dangerously low and controlled, a calm that was far more ominous than any shout. He asked if she meant after she and her mother announced an engagement without his knowledge or consent, after they pursued him to Cornwall despite his explicit wishes to be left alone. The Countess drew herself up, protesting that they only wanted what was best for him. Marriage to Amelia would have secured his position, united two great families. Julian interrupted, reminding her tersely that he was already married. He gestured to Thea, presenting his wife Theodora, Duchess of Greymont. But even as he spoke, he could see the panic flickering behind the Countess's arrogance, the awareness of her own family's precarious finances, and the desperate gamble she had made and lost. This had never been about his happiness or even Amelia's. It had been about salvaging the Thornbury fortune through an advantageous match. The Countess's gaze swept over Thea with withering assessment. Yes, she said coldly. They had heard about his unfortunate entanglement. The whole of London was talking about it. how the Duke of Greymont was trapped by a calculating companion into a marriage far beneath his station. Before Julian could unleash the fury building in his chest, Thea stepped forward. She acknowledged that the Countess was correct. She was indeed far beneath the Duke's station. She had no title, no fortune, no family name to recommend her. But she had something far more valuable. She continued with quiet steel in her voice. She had his respect, his partnership, and his ring on her finger, which was more than the Countess or her daughter would ever have. The Countess's face flushed purple. She demanded to know how Thea dared speak to her in such a manner. This girl who was nothing but a... Julian cut her off, his voice like ice. Thea was his wife, and this was her home. The Countess would show her the respect due to a duchess, or she would leave, immediately. Lady Amelia tried to intervene, reaching for Julian's arm and pleading with him. They only wanted to help. Surely he could see that this marriage was a mistake. It could be annulled, quietly. No one need know the details. He could still... Julian asked if she meant he could still marry her. His laugh was harsh. Even if he wanted to dissolve his marriage, which he emphatically did not, she would be the last woman in England he would consider. Her presumption, her manipulation, her utter disregard for his clearly stated wishes, all of it disgusted him. Lady Amelia's composure cracked. She asked incredulously if he would choose Thea over her. A nobody with red hair and freckles who trapped him into marriage. Julian said firmly that Thea had not trapped him. Circumstances did, but he was glad they had. Because that night in the storm, he met someone real, someone brave, someone who did not see him as a title or a fortune. Could Lady Amelia say the same? The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of the great hall clock. Finally, the Countess spoke, her voice venomous. Julian would regret this, she promised. Both of them. When society learned the truth about his wife's background, her flight from Lady Sophronia, the scandal that forced this marriage, they would be ostracized. And when that happened, they should not come begging for assistance. Julian replied that he would not dream of it. He asked Mrs. Blackwell to show their guests to their carriage. As the furious women swept out, trailing affronted dignity and bitter threats, Julian turned to Thea. She stood very still, her face pale but composed. She thanked him quietly for defending her. Julian said she had defended herself quite admirably. That line about having his respect, partnership, and ring had been brilliantly done. Thea told him she meant it. She did have those things, did she not? Julian moved closer, close enough to take her hand. She had all of that and more, he assured her. But he acknowledged that the Countess had been right about one thing. Society would talk. The scandal would follow them. Was she prepared for that? Thea said she had been prepared for scandal since the moment Lord Pemberton found them in that cottage. But there was something else concerning her. Lady Sophronia. They had mentioned her. If the Countess knew about Thea's flight, then... Julian finished the thought grimly. Then Lady Sophronia knew where she was, which meant they needed to act first. Over the next days, Julian threw himself into investigating Lady Sophronia's affairs. He knew that direct accusations would be useless, a servant's word against a wealthy widow's. So he took a different approach. He wrote an urgent letter to his solicitor in London, a man known not only for his discretion, but for his remarkable ability to persuade people to reveal secrets they preferred to keep buried. Julian instructed him to focus his attention on Mr. Grimsby, the family solicitor. Men in Grimsby's position often kept meticulous records, either as insurance or from habitual caution. If there were irregularities in the Chelmsford estate dealings, Grimsby would know. And if properly motivated, whether by fear of prosecution or promise of immunity, he might be persuaded to share what he knew. Thea helped where she could, providing details about the household, the nephew, the overheard conversation. They worked together in the library, papers spread across the desk, building their case piece by careful piece. One evening, Thea said slowly that she remembered the solicitor Lady Sophronia had been speaking with. Mr. Grimsby had been with the family for 20 years. If he was involved, there might be other irregularities in the estate records. Julian agreed, asking if she could remember anything else from what she overheard. Any specific names, amounts, dates. Thea closed her eyes, clearly forcing herself to relive that terrible night. Lady Sophronia had said the boy would not see 21. He was 20 now. That meant she was planning something within the year. And she mentioned something about a hunting accident. Thea thought that was how Lady Sophronia meant to do it. Julian felt cold fury settle in his bones. Then they needed to warn him immediately. He asked where the nephew was. At school, Thea thought. Eton or Harrow, she was not certain. But he came home for the holidays. Julian asked when. 3 weeks, Thea replied. Less, now. It was a race against time, made more complicated when a letter arrived from Lady Sophronia herself, imperious and threatening. Thea's voice shook as she read the demands. Lady Sophronia wanted Thea's return. She claimed theft, said she had witnesses, threatened prosecution unless Thea came back to answer for her crimes. Julian took the letter, read it, then calmly fed it to the library fire. Thea was not going anywhere, he declared. Let Lady Sophronia make her threats. They had something she did not expect, position and resources. But Lady Sophronia was not finished. 2 weeks later, as Julian and Thea were beginning to feel they might actually build something real from their forced marriage, she arrived at Greymont herself, accompanied by a constable and 2 intimidating men she introduced as witnesses to Thea's supposed theft. Lady Sophronia pointed at Thea with theatrical drama, declaring that there was the girl who robbed her. She demanded Thea be taken into custody at once. The constable looked uncomfortable, clearly aware he was caught between a wealthy widow and a duke. He said apologetically that he was afraid he must ask. Julian cut him off, his voice carrying an authority he rarely used. The constable must ask nothing. This woman had made false accusations against his wife. Unless she had actual evidence of theft, she would leave his property immediately. Lady Sophronia protested. Evidence? She had the testimony of her household staff, who saw Thea acting suspiciously on the night she fled. She had a valuable necklace missing from her chambers. She had... Thea interrupted, her voice ringing clear despite her fear. Lady Sophronia had nothing but lies, and Thea knew why. She wanted Thea back in her household not because of theft, but because of what Thea knew. About the will. About her plans for her nephew. Lady Sophronia's eyes went cold. She accused Thea of speaking nonsense, the fever dreams of a disturbed mind. Thea asked if that was so. Then perhaps they should bring these accusations before a magistrate. They could discuss everything. Her supposed theft, Lady Sophronia's forged will, her plans for young Lord Chelmsford's hunting accident. They could air it all publicly and see which of them society believed. For the first time, Lady Sophronia looked uncertain. She insisted Thea would not dare. There was no proof. Julian stepped forward with documents in his hand, correcting her assumption. Actually, they did have proof. His solicitors had been very thorough. It was amazing what a generous payment could uncover. Mr. Grimsby, it seemed, kept careful records of all his transactions, including those involving forged signatures and altered wills. He held up the papers, detailing sworn affidavits, copies of the original and altered documents, and Mr. Grimsby's confession, obtained in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Furthermore, he had already sent word to Lord Chelmsford's school, warning them of the danger and arranging for the boy to remain there under protection until this matter was resolved. Lady Sophronia's face had gone white. She accused him of bluffing. Julian asked calmly if she wished to test it. Should he send these documents to the Crown Prosecutor and let the law decide? Or would she prefer to leave quietly, withdraw her false accusations, and disappear from public life before this scandal destroyed her? The constable was edging toward the door, clearly wanting no part of what was unfolding. Lady Sophronia's witnesses had gone equally pale, likely realizing they had been brought to threaten a duchess based on fabricated evidence. Lady Sophronia insisted weakly that he could not prove any of this. Julian replied that he could prove all of it. And he would, unless she left now and never troubled his wife again. She should make her choice. For a long moment, Lady Sophronia simply stared at Julian, then at Thea, hatred burning in her eyes. Finally, she turned on her heel, hissing that this was not over. Julian's voice was calm as he corrected her. Oh, but it was, completely and utterly over. He asked the constable if he would be so kind as to escort these people from his property. After they left, Thea sank into a chair, all the strength seeming to leave her body at once. Julian knelt beside her, taking her hands, telling her gently that it was done. Lady Sophronia could not hurt her anymore. Thea said wonderingly that he had actually done it. He had stopped her. Julian said they had stopped her together. Her courage in confronting the woman, her memory of what she overheard, that was what made the difference. Thea looked down at their joined hands. She began to say she did not know how to repay him. He asked in gentle surprise if she meant to repay him. Thea, she had already given him more than she knew. She had made this place feel like a home. She had shown him that duty and choice could sometimes align. She had, he paused, searching for the right words, made him believe that their marriage might be more than just circumstance. Her eyes lifted to his, wide and vulnerable. She started to speak his name. Whatever she meant to say was interrupted by Mrs. Blackwell entering with news that the solicitors had arrived from London with more documents requiring His Grace's signature. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them, something that could not be easily dismissed. The next weeks brought a cascade of changes. Lady Sophronia was quietly encouraged to leave the country, her crimes never made fully public but known enough in certain circles to ensure her social ruin. Young Lord Chelmsford was installed safely with distant relatives who actually cared for his welfare. And slowly, carefully, Julian and Thea found themselves growing closer. They developed rituals, morning walks along the cliff paths, evenings in the library, long conversations over dinner that stretched late into the night. Julian taught Thea to manage the estate accounts properly. Thea showed Julian how to navigate the subtle politics of household management. They laughed together, argued about books, discovered shared opinions and surprising differences. One afternoon, as Julian watched Thea organize repairs with military precision, he observed that she was quite bossy when it came to tenant relations. She retorted that he was impossibly stubborn about modernizing the farming equipment. Those methods were 50 years outdated. He protested they were traditional. She declared they were inefficient. He countered that she insisted on hand-polishing the silver. Was that not about maintaining traditions? She said that was different. That was about maintaining standards. He asked if his farming methods were not about standards as well. They stood glaring at each other for a moment, then both burst into laughter. It felt good, Julian realized. Natural. Like something that had been building between them since that first night in the storm. But there was still a wall between them, carefully maintained by separate bedrooms and friendly distance. Julian was acutely aware of it every time Thea bid him good night and retreated to her chambers. He wanted to cross that divide, but had no idea if she wanted the same thing. The answer came on a cold October evening, 3 months after their wedding. Julian found Thea in the music room, playing the pianoforte with surprising skill. He stood in the doorway, listening to the melancholy melody drift through the room. When she finished, he complimented the beauty of the piece. He had not known she played. Thea explained that Lady Sophronia had not known either. She used to practice late at night when her employer was asleep. It was her one act of rebellion. Julian crossed the room to stand beside the piano, remarking that she should play more often. The castle had been too quiet. Thea's fingers rested on the keys. She asked if he thought so. Sometimes she felt it was too loud. All these empty rooms, all this space. They rattled around in here like two ghosts. Julian asked if that was what she wanted, something smaller, quieter. She said no, then paused. She told him she wanted, but trailed off, seeming to gather courage. She needed to ask him something, and she needed an honest answer. He promised always to be honest. She asked directly if he regretted it, marrying her. Julian took a breath before answering. No, he said firmly, not for a single moment. She pressed on, even though he was forced into it, even though she was not what a duchess should be. He told her she was exactly what this duchess should be. She was clever and brave and kind. She had made Greymont feel like a home instead of a prison. She had made him feel less alone. He paused, then added that he needed to ask her the same question. Did she regret it? She stood, moving away from the piano to face him fully. She confessed that she regretted it at first. She thought she had trapped him, ruined his life, forced him into something he did not want. But these past months, she said, taking a breath, she had been happier here, with him, than she ever was before. Even when they argued about farming equipment. Julian corrected with a slight smile that it was especially when they argued about farming equipment. She laughed. She continued, her voice dropping, that the thing was, she was not sure how to move forward from here. They were married, but not truly married. They were friends, but not just friends. And she did not know what he wanted from this, from them. Julian closed the distance between them in 3 strides. He said honestly that he wanted everything. He wanted a real marriage, not just a convenient arrangement. He wanted her in his life, in his home, in his... He stopped, suddenly aware of how much he was revealing. Thea finished softly. In his heart? When Julian nodded, unable to speak, she reached up to touch his face. She told him he already had all of that from her. She thought she fell for him that night in the cottage, when he could have left her in the storm, but did not. When he chose honor over convenience. She was just too scared to admit it. Julian asked what had changed now. She said she was still scared, but she was more scared of wasting whatever time they had being careful and distant when they could be truly together. Julian cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears he had not realized she was shedding. He asked Thea Sinclair, Duchess of Greymont, if she would marry him. Again, but properly this time, with intention and choice. She pointed out, smiling through her tears, that they were already married. Then would she stay married to him, he asked. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. She whispered, yes. Yes, she would. The kiss that followed was nothing like the chaste brush at their wedding. It was deep and searching, full of 3 months of longing and the promise of a future they could actually choose. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Julian rested his forehead against hers. He declared there would be no more separate chambers, no more pretense, just them, building a life together. Thea agreed, just them. 1 year later, Greymont Castle had been transformed. The repairs were complete, the tenants prosperous, and the estate running smoothly under the joint management of the Duke and Duchess. Thea had established a charitable foundation to help young women in situations like hers, those without family or means who needed education and opportunities. Julian had modernized the farming methods, much to his wife's satisfaction. But more importantly, they had transformed themselves. The awkward, forced marriage had become something neither of them could imagine living without. They fought and laughed and loved with equal passion. They finished each other's sentences and challenged each other's opinions. They had become partners in every sense of the word. One afternoon, as Thea was organizing correspondence in her sitting room, she came across something she had not thought of in months, tucked in the pocket of her old travel cloak, the small knife she had threatened Julian with on that storm-soaked road. She held it for a moment, remembering the desperation and fear that had driven her to draw it. Then, with a small smile, she placed it carefully in the bottom drawer of her writing desk, beneath packets of letters and unused stationery. She no longer needed its cold protection. She had found something far more powerful, a partner who would stand beside her against any threat, and a home where she was valued not for what she could provide, but for who she was. On their first anniversary, they stood on the cliffs where Thea had first seen Greymont, the wind whipping her hair, now threaded with small flowers Julian had picked that morning, around her face. Julian asked if she remembered what she had said that first night, about preferring to die rather than go back. Thea said she remembered feeling certain her life was over. She had no idea it was just beginning. Julian remarked that they had both been running from something. He never expected to run straight into her. Thea mused that they had been caught in a storm with a stranger. That was how it started. Julian added that society declared them ruined. They were not entirely wrong. Thea turned in his arms to face him. No, she agreed. They were not wrong. They had been ruined. For anyone else. After that night, after he held her and listened to her and saw her as more than just a servant or an inconvenience, she was ruined for the idea of life without him. Julian said that was good, kissing her softly, because he intended to keep ruining her in the best possible ways for the next 50 years. She asked teasingly if it would be only 50 years. She was hoping for longer. He accused her of being an ambitious woman. She replied that he would not have her any other way. And as the sun set over the Cornish cliffs, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they stood together, two people who had been forced into marriage by scandal and circumstance, who had chosen to stay for love, who had turned ruin into redemption and built something beautiful from the ashes of what society had tried to destroy. Dear listener, sometimes life forces our hand in ways we never anticipated. Like Thea and Julian, you may find yourself in circumstances that feel wrong, trapped, or impossibly difficult. Perhaps you have been caught in a storm not of your making, facing judgment for situations beyond your control. But here is what their story reminds us. The most constraining circumstances can become doorways to unexpected joy. What feels like ruin may simply be the breaking down of walls you did not know were holding you back. The person you meet in your darkest hour might be exactly who you needed all along. Tonight, know that your worth is not determined by how others perceive your choices. You are not defined by the storms you weather or the judgments you face. Like Thea, you have the courage to survive. Like Julian, you have the capacity to choose honor over convenience. And together, you have everything you need to build something beautiful from whatever circumstances life has handed you. Rest well, knowing that tomorrow is always another chance to choose what comes next. Thank you for staying with Thea and Julian's journey until the very end. If this story of courage, redemption, and love found in the most unexpected places touched your heart, please subscribe, like, and share it with someone who needs to hear that sometimes the biggest storms bring us exactly where we need to be. Your support helps us continue creating stories that celebrate resilience, honor, and the transformative power of true partnership.